why you and your colleagues were interested in this particular topic about sibling rivalry and when it becomes a little bit more.
We have been over 20 years working on peer bullying. So we have looked at what happens at school. You know, if kids are either physically, verbally, or relationally abusing other children repeatedly, and what the effects are on mental health. And then we thought, where does this peer bullying come from? And one of the areas could be within the family. So people usually look at parenting as a major factor, but we have found that actually parenting might not have that large effect. We did a meta-analysis on it. So we then looked at siblings, and the first study which we did which we published in 2004, was actually in Israel, with both Jewish and Arab kids in Israel. And we found such a large rate of sibling bullying, because the families are relatively large. There were on average 5. And then we looked at it, whether they were also bullying at school or were carrying knives and so on, and there was a very clear relationship. If you're a bully at home and bully your sibling, you're 3 times more likely to also bully children outside. If you're a victim, you're twice as likely also become a victim at school, because you have learned a pattern of domination or submission in a way of how you react to other people.
Tell me about your most recent study.
Well, we were actually the first to have now reported whether there are any effects on mental health, and not cross-sectionally. Cross-sectionally means you measure at the same time, you measure sibling bullying and you measure whether you've got mental health problem. But you don't know it's a chicken and egg problem. Could it be that you get bullied because you have a mental health problem? So what we did is we looked in a longitudinal study of 14,000 children who were actually recruited at 18 weeks in pregnancy, the mothers, and we have followed them now till in the 20s, but they are 18 years of age. We looked at their mental health. We looked at depression, anxiety, self-harm, and psychotic disorder. And we found for each of them, apart from anxiety, we found a double increased risk if you have been a victim of bullying or a bully victim, so you become victim and you fight back in the sibling relationship, controlling for family factors, maternal mental health, etc., we find that you double your risk of having depression or self-harming. But for psychotic disorder, we found it trebles the risk. This is like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder that these kids get at 18 years of age. And there it was interesting, different from depression, also the ones who were the perpetrators, the bullies, were more likely to get psychotic disorder. And we looked at risk-taking behavior, like drug use, being with the criminal justice system in contact. And there again, we found that those who are bullies in the family, are more likely, twice as likely, for example, having been in contact with the justice system, or are showing antisocial behavior like vandalism, fighting, and so on.
How do you define bully? How do you know that it's not just typical rivalry? What's the distinction between typical rivalry and being a sibling bully?
The difference is every child has to have conflict, because we do need conflict, because that's how we solve conflict, because we have to see, and it has to be challenging and so on. So that's not a problem. Bullying actually occurs always under very specific circumstances, when you don't choose the people you're with. And there are 3 situations, like in school, at the workplace, but at home. You can't tell your sibling to move out, or I want this sibling and not that one. You are like a caged animal in a place where you have to get on with people. So that's the definition first where bullying occurs in these situations. The second most important thing is that it's about intentional harm doing. You want to actually hurt someone to get a reaction. It's about dominance. It's repeated. So our definition of sibling bullying is it's every week or several times a week. So it's not the occasional conflict. And you can do it, and there's a power imbalance, which actually means that someone is stronger or perceived to be stronger in the relationship. And sibling relationships are usually defined by that, because you're rarely, apart from twins, the same age.
At what point should parents be concerned if they realize that this is a repeated behavior?
Well, the important thing is to say that we were very surprised about how little parents know about it. A lot of the sibling bullying actually happens behind closed doors. They're not aware, it's upstairs, they're in other rooms. But of course they see aggression between children. I think if it occurs every week, several times a week, and it also goes beyond boundaries, where you can see that one of the children is really upset, is crying, is feeling that it's harmed, is not just unfair because they didn't get something, then they should really start to get concerned about it. And it's a degree whether it's between both of them and it's not harm doing. You know, it's a really, they're joking around and they've got just a competition, or it is actually with the intention to really putting someone down, yeah, and gaining, hitting them. But it's also, I mean, for example, between girls, there's other things, which I find very distressing, is wearing the clothes of the sister. You know, she wants to go out, but it has been taken, you know, all the time. And she can't find it, you know, and so on. So there are a number of different ways of doing it. Or relationally, they've got friends around, but you're excluded. You can't be seen even in the house. Is
there a certain age at about which time this begins?
Well, rivalry, actually, if you talk about it, has been described actually by psychoanalysts in the 1940s. Starts very early on and use clay figures. And very often 2 or 3 year olds are saying, like, for example, when you do a play about there's now a new sibling coming into the family and so on, and they said, we don't need another kid in our family. Just throw it out. Now, consider your situation as the firstborn, yeah? And I want to give you just sort of paraphrase it. Like, for example, you're married, yeah? And suddenly your husband comes home with a younger version of you and says, I really do like this woman and I want her to move in now. And by the way, I would like you to like her. That's the situation of an eldest getting a brother or sister, where they get actually asked to relate in that way, to like them, even though they have to accept, I now only get half of the time, so they're experiencing losses.
What are some of the implications from these findings?
Well, there are 2 implications. We have completely, in theories about development, we have ignored siblings as a major influence. I mean, siblings, the relationship with siblings endures longer than the relationship with your parents. Even when your parents are dead, you're still relating. You become aunt and uncle, you have to deal with your parents later, there are inheritance issues, there are lots of potential for conflict. So it's a very long-term relationship which you have. And it is really surprising when we look at mental health issues or at outcome of children that we have ignored influence of siblings at all. If you go to a doctor or you see a clinical psychologist or a psychiatrist, or you go to a doctor and has their mental health problem, she is depressed or he is depressed, is anxious or has got psychotic, they hardly ever get asked about peers, and they hardly ever or never get asked about how's the relationship at home, how do the siblings get on. And it's the last taboo that exists. On the extreme, you find even children presenting at A&E having a broken arm or leg, and the parents say he fell down the stairs, but they don't say he was pushed or was pushed out of the bed, got injured in that way because they were fighting, because it's a taboo to say that there will be abuse. So it actually becomes very often normalized. And let me just give you another example that you do understand what normalization means, that we don't take it as serious, even though it's quite a serious problem, it affects children. So Mary sits at the desk. The assailant runs into the room, clobbers her around the head, she falls off the chair, starts screaming in pain. Mary, 25, her work colleague, calls the security and police. Mary, 10 years old, the mother says, John, you shouldn't do this, go up into your bedroom. Now, both of them have experienced the same pain, but we think if the brother does it, it's not that bad. But just think about it. The assailant is not coming back every day of clobbering you around the head. But you have to live with this person up to 18 years of your life in the same space, and you don't know whether this is going to happen again. And we make this as being normal and doesn't hurt as much as if a stranger does it, even though it's actually a more dangerous situation.
Was there another implication?
There are two implications. The first thing is that it really, for the victims, it has got really severe effects on them, on the mental health. But for the bullies, it's also a training ground to learn to do it outside the family, like for example with peers, because they've learned how to dominate. And if it's not intervened by the parents, to stop it, to see what is actually proper social or pro-social behavior, how to deal with others, they behave towards others as well, outside the family, or try at least to do this.
What, again, should parents look for? There are physical signs, obviously, but are there less obvious signs?
Well, I think the important thing is that parents should start right at the beginning, at birth, because rivalry is a very normal situation. Yeah. So, like the example I'd given about the couple where another wife comes home and you have to love this person as well in the family. If we just think about it, you're the firstborn, and now someone else comes into the family, you lose 50% of the resources. And we know already that if I would give you a salary increase of 10%, you're happy, yeah? But if I say tomorrow, I take 10% of your salary away, you're about 3 or 4 times more unhappy than you're happy with an increase. So we are very sensitive, we know this from behavioral science, to losses more than to gains. And for the firstborn, it's always a loss. So it gets halved. If a third child comes, it's 30%. So it's very important to see at the beginning of how do you manage this loss. And so for parents, it's quite important at an early stage to make clear that they also give time to, for example, the firstborn or secondborn if someone comes in. How, if you're particularly a two-parent family, you can divide times to give both the time. Secondly, how can you integrate the firstborn in care of the nextborn? How you can actually work out what is fair, to make, for example, clear that these kids have got different needs, that you can still give the need to play with this one, but this one needs breastfeeding, yeah? To actually make clear that both of them can have their needs met. So some easy things which you can do at the beginning is, like in pregnancy, to involve them, to listen to it and so on. That's interesting, which people do. But for example, the nice thing, I did this with when my son, my daughter came, secondborn, is that in the labor ward, he got a present, which his sister had brought, which he always wanted to have. So for the first few days, this was the most wonderful kid to have around. Of course, that wears off. So it's very important to then see how they can be integrated in there, see what are their rights, how to negotiate it. The second thing is, which is very important, is to know how to set limits. For example, one of the ways to learn how to set limits is to do play fighting. Lots of kids like doing play fighting. They fight around with you, and then they get so excited that they just hit too hard, or they bite you, or do something. In that moment, it's very important to stop, and I say, I don't play with you anymore, because if you do this, that's not acceptable. And that's the way how parents can teach what they do to their brother or to their sister, saying, so far, it's acceptable, but if you go beyond it, because how do they know? The third thing, which is very important, if you observe these types of, which is bullying then, because it's repeated, it's not just a conflict about something. If you observe this, that you're very consistent in intervening. It's very hard for parents. I mean, particularly if you come back from work, one night you feel like you're shouting and so on and you intervene. The next night you might just pour yourself a glass of wine and say, let them get on with it. So it's very important to see if you have got these conflicts to intervene.
What about for kids that are older, if parents have not caught this until they're in their teens, that there might be a problem?
Yeah, there are sometimes changing relationships as well. I mean, as kids grow up, they might get on earlier, but then they might be competitor at the later time, or vice versa. Again, it's very important to be consistent, to set rules. But when they're older, you can also talk about it. You can actually, different from little or toddlers, etc., that are involved in it, you can actually go to take perspective taking, because the problem is very often that you just think about your right And the first word after mum and dad that kids learn is, that's unfair. Yeah, it's the idea that someone gets something more than you. But to think about it, what you do, how it affects someone else. To give them examples how it is. So it's really about social cognition, to understand what effect it has on the other person, to see whether you can empathize with it, if it happens to yourself, and you can talk about it, how you can solve these conflicts. Rather than shouting with it, what would be the way to do it? The second thing which people have found is, which helps with conflict relationship, is to encourage friendships outside of the family. Because if you're good with friends, you're less likely to bully your sibling. And one interesting finding which we had from our research, that actually time spent together breeds contempt. So if the siblings spend a lot of time together, they learn so much which button to press to annoy the other one. So it's very important to have also activities apart from the siblings together. Particularly if you've got three, it's so easy and said, oh, I don't need to bring friends around and things, they just can play together. But it also means that they know each other, that, well, it's like in a partner relationship. If you spend all the time together, you know exactly what annoys you, or what can annoy the other person. You know the buttons to press. But if you have time apart, then you come together and enjoy the time.
Is it too much of a link to say by recognizing and curbing bullying in the home, you're also curbing bullying in the schools and in the communities?
Well, there's clearly a relationship, an association, and it starts early on. There's one very interesting study. They observed at 1.5 years toddlers at home, yeah, and whether they were actually hitting their younger brother or sister. And then at 3 years, they brought together peers in a group which they didn't know, 2 other peers. And the ones who had already been aggressive towards their siblings were more likely to try to dominate as well. So it seems to go from the family. The studies haven't been done. This is interesting. We're only putting this on the table in the last few years, that this is really a problem. And it's important for mental health and for well-being and quality of life. That it's likely that if you do change it in the family, that it also has an effect on peer relationship, but we need to test it.
Is there anything I didn't ask you, Dieter, that you would want people to know about this line of study?
The one thing that was very important, or which was a real eye-opener for us, when we published the first study on the effects on depression, we had thousands of people writing in, actually, to a broadcaster, and they said we do a news magazine piece on this. And reading these stories, I had tears in my eyes. I mean, it's like with the heading, I wished I'd never been born. My brother was just dominating me all the time. He rode over my bed, you fat pig. Yeah, he would hit me and so on. My parents didn't protect me. This is the major story we get. No one protected me, and I couldn't talk about it. And I'm now depressed, and I can't talk to this, and I have such a hate for this person. And I really had at 12, I thought I'd take my life because I could not cope with it anymore. And there was story after story. And somehow you can't bring it up at family meetings, because I said, the brother or something, it was just a bit of joke, a bit of banter. We just did joke around. You did some as well. And so that it's not even recognized. So that's an important part. And the second thing is really, what are the precursors? We haven't talked about that.
Okay, so what are some of them?
Just a few weeks ago, we published in Developmental Psychology this article, which is Trouble in the Nest, Precursors of Sibling Bullying. And we were really looking at it. Is it about parenting, how warm parenting is, and so on? Is it about individual differences, like how clever you are, your motor abilities, whether you're male or female? Or is it about relationships between them? Or is it evolutionary? It's basically about, like you find in the nest with birds, that if you're stronger, you push the others out, yeah, or push them away, that you get fed more. And what we found is that the best explanation was an evolutionary one. It's very clearly that of the bullies, it's the firstborn who's more frequently bullied. The second thing is, if you're firstborn and male, you're even more likely to be a bully. And the more children you have got in the family, the more likely you have got bullying. So it's about resources. It's a fight for resources. And now comes the interesting thing. Sibling bullying is completely social class blind. It occurs in families that are rich or poor or in the middle. There was no relationship at all because you are in a system in the family. So if you're wealthier, you might fight for the new smartphone, and for the other one just for pocket money or lolly. But it is within the family that is the balance of having the power. We didn't find any difference, which is interesting, we thought, between single parent family or parents where both of the parents are there. So there was no relationship at all. So it's really blind to the social aspects because it's within the family.
So again, it's not a parenting issue, as you said. It's more parents need to watch for this developmental issue.
Well, it is partly. I mean, we found relationships, if you, for example, have a lot of conflict in your marriage, you're modeling, like, for example, domestic violence, yeah? Those factors, they were related, but once you controlled for the others, there were small effects. So parenting does matter. But there's now another important analogy. So if you think that parenting is not the most important part why it arises, parenting may be the most important how to treat it. And again, let me just give you an example. It's the headache problem. Everyone will have had a headache. So you now give a paracetamol, or drug, any drug, for a headache, yeah? And your headache gets better. But no one would have the idea that the original headache came because of paracetamol deprivation. Yeah? So you can use a treatment which is not the cause of the problem. And this is the same. You can use parenting, and there's some evidence for it, to treat it, to help with it, but it wasn't the cause. So we must not think because there's a problem, this is always due to the parents. But we have to understand it's this combination. Also, if you're closer in age between siblings, you have more conflicts. The more boys you have got there's more competition. So there are a number of factors which make it harder. So if you could plan pregnancy, you would have a daughter first, and then you would have a son. There's slightly less of sibling bullying.
But of course, that being out the window, you just have to know that it exists, first of all.
Yeah.
And then take steps to intervene.
So I think the major message is, the first thing, if it occurs, don't trivialize it, take it serious, yeah? Try, when they're older, to talk about it with them, set very clear limits of what is allowable or not, and be consistent in intervening. But try to be fair and explain what the fairness is. Fair doesn't mean that both get the same, because they're different kids, they have different needs. Fair means that they get what they need.